Okay. What's our topic for today?
Topic for today, we're going to resume our conversation on things underrated,
Oh,
things
yeah.
of quality that are well rated but not sufficiently highly rated for our particular tastes. So you left us off with um, several goodies. You gave us Robertson Davies, and I gave you Borges. So I don't know if you remember what you had before, but do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do actually.
Okay, let's go.
Um, there's a cult movie that nobody understands, or I've never seen anybody who understood it. I've never read anything about it that indicated an understanding of it. And I think it came out in the late 70s, which would have been my time. And it's called The Warriors.
Oh, yes. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Now, the reason why this
It's
is,
it's the Odyssey.
no,
Okay, it's not the Odyssey.
no,
Okay.
it's Xenophon Xenobasis.
Okay.
It's what you learn when you start in Greek. It's one of the easier travel narratives, and it's very exciting.
Hmm.
Xenophon and a bunch of Greeks are in the court of Cyrus. Now, if you remember the head of all the gangs in New York City and the Warriors, his
Yeah.
name is Cyrus. And
That's
Cyrus gets
right.
killed, and the Greeks get blamed for it. So they have to fight their way back, not to Coney Island, but to the Black Sea. But it's exactly the same story. And so I've read an awful lot of preposterous stuff about this. And it comes from people that just haven't done, they just haven't put in the time and haven't done the reading. But I remember back in the 70s, I thought, this is Xenophon's Anabasis. I was just in college then. It's not that far advanced, but it's
Yeah.
misunderstood by nearly everybody. And I
You're
think
right.
that that's
That was a cult classic.
yes.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's a cool movie,
Well,
right?
it was that whole 70s feeling of like everything's dissolving and the
It was
world's
that
going down an
malaise that the president talked about.
What's that?
It's that malaise that Jimmy
Yeah,
Carter
well,
talked
it's
about.
the malaise is that it was the upbeat look of it. The dark
Yeah,
look of it was the Warriors or
yeah,
Escape from New York.
that's right. That's right.
Okay.
No, you got that right. Um, so I think that's a highly underrated movie. And for those of you that are studying Greek or just like the ancients, read the Anabasis. It's actually kind of an interesting book by Xenophon, and then watch the Warriors, and you'll see it's pretty much isomorphic,
Okay.
right? Yeah, I like that movie, and I think it's underrated.
Well,
What
I
do you
think
think
you're
is
right. It was
underrated?
late 70s. What's that?
What did you? Do you have a
Okay, sure.
proposal for
Actually,
underrated?
I'm going to go with film, and this is also a cult figure who I think is severely underrated, though he's highly rated, and that's Andrei Tarkovsky.
Hmm.
So he didn't do a lot of films. He did 7 or 8, depending on how you count. Um, and they're not high production values, and they're not exactly action thrillers, to say the least. But I think his story construction is fantastic. I think the material he uses is great. I think his cinematography is rivaled only by his contemporary Stanley Kubrick. And I think if you consider the constraints he worked under, working in the Soviet Union and telling the sort of stories he did, I, you know, I'm trying to think, is there a filmmaker that's a comparable artist in the 20th century? And I
Well,
think
particularly getting around the state, you
yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, it's funny. That's true. That was the not only that, but the fact that you know the Soviets competed in everything, but there were some things they put a lot of resources in because they were going to win.
Right.
Right? They were going to have the world's chess champion, except for
Yeah.
once. They
Right.
were, you know, they were going to be really good at hockey. They just were.
They were focused.
That's right. And they were going to have the best ballet company, and have the least decadent classical music, but the film, they just didn't have a lot of resources to put in, and it just wasn't a big deal. And what he did with the little resources he had was astounding. So, I mean, in some ways, to be fair, he had the advantage of working in the Soviet Union, right? I mean,
well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of guys who worked in Hollywood, that's why I mentioned Kubrick before. And Kubrick strikes me as, in a lot of ways, probably his biggest parallel. Very different, but they both realized, like, here's the problem. Hollywood makes these things called movies, and they eliminate the possibility of doing any art with a camera. And they're just really good entertainment, and they're really gripping, but, they will format the brain of the audience such that if you present them with a work of art, they will not know what to do with it. So in some ways, it was maybe easier for Tarkovsky because they just couldn't do. I mean, it is not easy to have the tower. I mean, when we were at that age, the Towering Inferno and Sense-Around, and then later the blockbusters of Spielberg and Lucas and one after another. Technologically, that's not easy to do, and it's really convincing, except that you're just eating intellectual cotton candy.
Yeah, that's right. It's meant to anesthetize you for a couple of hours on a date. All right. And best example of it would be something like the James Bond movies, because they're all really the same movie.
And I really like them too, is the horrible thing. I mean, I know it's like eating junk food. It's a junk food movie, but they're really fun. But it's like it's so hard after that. In a James Bond movie, the opening sequence, even before the first credit, there's 4 or 5 corpses, and a couple of very luscious women.
I want to have sex with them spontaneously
instantly
before the helicopter blows up.
Who wouldn't, right? Right. So, you're conditioned in such a way that when you start a Tarkovsky movie and there's a horse, he's walking across the field. And he's still walking across the field. And he'll be walking across the field for 5 minutes. At one point, one of his opening sequences like that the film board said to him in the Soviet Union, said, look, I know what you're trying to do. This is very profound, and you're the only one who wins the Cannes Festival for us. But if we keep this up, if you don't do something on the screen, half the audience is going to leave. And Tarkovsky said, well, you're right. I have to extend this scene because I got to get another half of the other half out first. He was a joy to, he was a joy to work with. He's like, look, if you're looking for action, LA, go to LA. I'm trying to be, Van Gogh behind a camera. So that would be one I'd throw in. And if you haven't seen them, be patient. They're ungodly long, guys, and they're in foreign languages, but they're visually beautiful, and they deal with extremely philosophically profound issues.
It sounds great. I will look this up.
Okay. You may have seen. Have you ever seen Solaris or heard of it?
Yes, I have.
Okay, that was probably his most popular film. Solaris.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I see the connection to 2001 in the cinematography now that you mentioned.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people thought Solaris was done as a reaction, and it is a very, what's interesting is 2001 is visually immaculate. I mean, it's beautiful and pristine because it's also sterile.
Yes.
Nothing lives on any of those surfaces. And that's, the American NASA ideal of the time, right? Of just clean, pure, high tech. And so, Tarkovsky said, let me show you what a Soviet space station will look like. And its wires are everywhere and things are running around. It's a complete mess. And everyone's having psychotic delusions all the time.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was, it was based on a short story by a Polish
Lem or something.
Yep.
Stanislaw Lem, would that be the guy?
Stanislaw Lem, right. And he said, look, it was a great movie, but you give it to a Russian, they always give you Dostoevsky in space. They can't help it.
Right, right. I don't know. You said that 2001 was sterile, and I think you're right, except for one exception, and it's the big exception, right?
That's the Star Baby.
Well, no, before the Star Baby.
Oh, yeah.
Where Star Baby comes from, right?
Right.
Jupiter is a giant egg cell. It's an ovum, and if you get a chance to look at the spacecraft they're flying in, all right, it's a sperm. So what they're doing is connecting these things at a micro level that are going to generate some macro level thing, the Star Baby. And this is going to be the kind of change that getting tools was back, when we were in Africa, right? So 2001 is one of the most enigmatic pieces, and that's just part of Kubrick's oeuvre, and I think he's an exceptionally talented individual. But if I were to move from 2001 to what I think is his greatest movie, that's A Clockwork Orange. Okay, now here's the deal. You have to look at what's going on in the background of A Clockwork Orange in order to understand what's here. Anthony Burgess wrote a novel called A Clockwork Orange. It had 3 sections of 7 chapters each. And in the final chapter, our anti-hero Alex repents of his evil ways and decides to go straight.
That's right.
Okay. That was left out of the American edition. So there's no redemption. I would argue that Burgess's novel, A Clockwork Orange, is the most important Christian novel of the 20th century. Here's why I think that. Burgess was a Joyce scholar. And if you know Joyce, particularly Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, that stuff is saturated in Nietzsche, right? You can't separate Nietzsche's aestheticism from the aestheticism that we get with Stephen Dedalus, who gives up religion for art. Okay, Burgess is a Joyce critic, a pro, and he's gotten rather tired of this idea of the aesthetic hero. And in a way, he's going back to Kierkegaard and saying, well, what if your aesthetic hero, instead of being kind of a nerdy guy who writes excessively long sentences, what if he's a monster? I mean, he might be a great aesthete like Alex actually is, but have you considered what happens when you abolish moral rules in favor of a purely aesthetic hero? So Alex is Burgess's response to Joyce's Stephen Dedalus. Okay. Now, well, in other words, he's saying, look, I'll match you aesthetic heroes. All right. Your guy will go on to become famous. Mine is going to engage in murder and rape and stuff. All right. Now, when Alex, in the movie, we have some things that aren't directly in the novel, and this is important. Burgess is Kubrick is siding with Burgess, but from another perspective. Instead of the Christian perspective that we have with the novel A Clockwork Orange, the movie A Clockwork Orange is in fact Platonic. And this is this is Kubrick's critique of the art of video, the art of the motion picture, okay? When he sits Alex in that theater for the Ludovico technique, it's not an accident that it's a theater, because what Kubrick is saying is that the sex and violence that we see in the media, particularly Hollywood, but in the media generally, that they are the new poets, and they're flashing images on a screen, just like you see in the Myth of the Cave. So Alex actually undergoes the Ludovico technique, which means that he's going to lose. He's going to be mutilated. He's going to lose his chance to choose things, but we're going to get political results in exchange for that. So I think that Kubrick is siding with Plato. And what he's saying is, look, your video, your motion picture industry is deeply morally corrupt. Think of it this way. 1939, best picture of the year, Gone with the Wind. Now, if you look towards the end of that movie, Rhett and Scarlett are having a little bit of a tiff. They're married, but they're not cohabiting. And Rhett just picks her up, carries her up the stairs while she kicks him and screams. And then we have just a cutaway to Scarlett in the morning, and she has never been happier. She got a big smile on her face, and her life has never been better. So now what Kubrick is asking is this. Which of these movies is immoral? The one that makes rape look horrible and terrifying, or the one that makes it look like the best thing that lady ever had? Because one of these is fun for the whole family, and the other one deserves an X because it's full of evil. So what he's doing is saying, let me turn this around on you. This is what Plato said about poetry, and this is what Kubrick is saying about film. He's saying this is a very dangerous art form because you don't realize that we're all Alex and we're all undergoing the Ludovico technique. It's not an accident that he names him Alex. It means a lex, no law. Right? So I think that both the Burgess novel and the Kubrick movie are greatly underestimated. There's a lot going on there. And yes, it's full of horrible violence, but that's sort of the point. What he's asking is all the other fun violence that you've been watching. How do you think that affects you and your family and your kids? Think of Itchy and Scratchy on The Simpsons, right? Right.
Yeah.
Same points getting made.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's interesting when the Burgess novel was released in the United States, which is what Kubrick worked from.
That's right.
It only had 20 chapters.
That's right. That's right.
It's very interesting. American publishers left the last one out. Yeah.
Well, they just couldn't deal with redemption. Right.
I guess. Okay. So we're doing well in film. Let me try another a piece of entertainment. This one a little bit longer and back in my time. I know we spoke previously about Mann and Goethe. Totally different flavor. Lawrence Stern, Tristram Shandy. The life and opinions of Tristram Shandy. It is
the ultimate experimental novel.
Yeah, it is. It's the ultimate experimental novel. It's a huge gas. It's long, but it's fun and it's bizarre. Towards the end of the novel, if it is a novel, towards the end of it, someone's telling a story, and it's clearly the story of the story, which we're about to go to the story. And he says, "So what kind of a story is it?" I think it may be the closing line of the book. So it's a cock and bull story. One of the very best.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's full of great stuff. I like the digression in praise of digressions.
Yeah. It's this huge, and also the whole, there's two, I don't want to give it away. There's two plot lines. It's a very strange plot line because the book is about the opinions of the protagonist. But you need to know before that how the protagonist was raised. And before that, we need to know his background and his family and what the plans for him were. And it turns out, as we go back for 500 or 600 pages, the book ends, he's never even been born yet. So it's this immense digression on digression. There's also two subplot lines. One is his father's tragic scientific obsessions, right, which lead him to be damaged in his nose, which is symbolic in the 18th century for his genitalia, and the story of his dear uncle Toby and or Walter, excuse me, and his sort of batsman Toby, and their romance, and he's also been injured in the nose, and they are completely out of time, and they are both really, going back to something you did in a class over the summer. They're the long love kisses that all proper modern literature are to Don Quixote.
Mm-hmm.
To the great picaresque of the servant and the Lord, and the Lord is learned and foolish, and the servant's an ignoramus and infinitely wiser. They're all Punchinello all the way down. So
that's a great point. Let me think. I don't know if you've read them yet, but it's something I hope we'll do in the future. The two new Cormac McCarthy novels. Okay. I think it's strangely enough, it's a novel and a half. I think that more is going on there than meets the eye. I think that McCarthy has a particular interest in something like not just the subconscious, but a kind of collective unconscious. It's all kind of Jungian. I don't think that he's, as somebody described Jung as moon-headed, and I sort of like that description, but he's not moon-headed. He hangs around with scientists and mathematicians, and they keep him on the straight and narrow the way you do with me. Reel it in, Mike. So he just published in 2017 an article on the origin of language and consciousness. So he's been working on that. And I think that this novel and a half are about that.
mm-hmm.
When the diver goes down and searches, because the protagonist in the first novel is the passenger is a rescue diver, comes on a plane, and he's diving down, finds some things, but not all the things he's looking for. And I think that's a dive into the unconscious. And also, he and his sister, who is a genius, she's getting her PhD, and she's like 15. She has an undisguised, incestuous desire for him, which is deeply unwholesome,
Mm-hmm.
and leads to her killing herself. And the second part is just her tapes with her psychiatrist before she kills herself. That's what the second book is. But the thing that's scariest about this is an artifact of her schizophrenia, and it's called the thalidomide kid. If you can imagine a little penguin, human penguin with flippers for feet, and who's always making wisecracks. Okay, this is a thoroughly American diabolical figure. I think that it suggests the outcome of their incestuous relationship, if they indeed had one, because you can't tell. And what's really scary is that this same thalidomide kid shows up not just in schizophrenic sister, but also after she dies, ends up talking to the protagonist, the deep diver,
Mm-hmm.
and how you can possibly share this thing. I mean, it's really kind of Dostoevskian and terrifying, but it's one of the weirdest things since he invented the judge in Blood Meridian. I mean, there's always one character that makes you say, where did this come from? And I think that's worth, if you and I sit down and read it and maybe have some fun with the book, because I haven't been very satisfied with the response that it's gotten.
Okay, it's gotten very high praise so far.
Yeah, I don't think, I'd like to see them connected to his earlier work, but yeah, I see that this is, I think it's an outstanding achievement.
Do you feel like this is the culmination of his?
No, I think Blood Meridian is. But
that's the high point.
I think this is his coda. This is his farewell, and it's artfully done. It's really beautiful.
Okay. Well, since we're kicking around literary figures, I give you my taste among recent American authors. And again, highly rated, but not highly rated enough for my taste, is William Gattis.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, he's probably my favorite American writer.
You introduced me to him, and yeah, that's a great choice.
Again, not many novels. He didn't. It took him about 10 years to put out a novel, and they tended to be phone books, huge things. But I find him thematically interesting. He's obsessed with the problem of creativity and originality. And he also strikes me as very concerned about, as an American author, the nexus of sort of Aristotle and Tocqueville. Does a democratic ethos allow you to create a high culture, and what does a democracy do? Or even the Platonic question: what does a democracy do to high culture? But I also think, just technique-wise, look, I think there are Americans who are magnificent in technique. I think Faulkner's treatment of interiority. I think Melville's use of digression as well. And it's funny too. He's also can be really funny and weird, but you mentioned before Portrait of the Artist. Joyce introduces two new techniques in that novel. One of the things I like about the novel, it's written for dummies like me, because as he develops the technique, he teaches you how to read it so that you can now read the next chapter and not be as dumb as you were before. So he teaches you how to do stream of consciousness with him. He teaches you how to do a particular poetical form that he learned from I forget the name of the French form, and we see him build a poem for several pages. But he developed, I thought, two really new techniques there. One was the stream of consciousness, which is disparate and loose, and it's distinguished from previous interiority because it's not bound by the logical structure of the sentence. It's free form because this is what he's arguing. We don't actually think like that. We only do that when we're about to talk.
It's pre-grammatical.
Exactly. And it's free flowing, and it's associative rather than inferential. But the other thing he does is develops a form of dialogue where, after about 4 or 5 exchanges, he drops identification, he drops quotation marks, and just puts an M dash at the beginning of the line. And he's like, now put on your big boy pants, guys. You can figure out who's saying what. You should have by this point. Yeah, by this point, you should have detected what they sound like, the different characters, and which one is Stephen and which one is whoever, Mikey or whatever.
All right, just a second. Let me give you something here. Alex in A Clockwork Orange actually first appears in Portrait of the Artist as a young man. He and his droog, the guy's name is Heron, they beat Stephen up over an aesthetic dispute about poetry, whether Tennyson is better than Byron, I believe. And that aesthetic dispute, and Heron is described as having they're beating him up.
I remember, yeah.
Right, he's having a cane. This is Alex. So, in other words, Kubrick lifted Alex right out of here. And so did Burgess. And they both, I assume, explained that to one another, but that's where that comes from. In other words, I think Alex has a longer history than you might expect.
But what's interesting there is Alex is the anti-Stephen.
Yes, exactly right. And of course, that's exactly the point of the novel. What if we had an aesthetic hero who was just not a good boy?
Right. So anyway, back to what Gattis did. So, what Joyce's more celebrated breakthrough is the stream of consciousness, because it just shows how inchoate our thought is. And what Gattis did, and he's good, I think he actually wrote The Subways, is he listened to the way people actually speak. And not in all of them, but his first, I guess, 6 novels, his last posthumous one is Stream of Consciousness. But the others are almost entirely M-dashed, unattributed, unquoted dialogue.
Right.
Throw you right in the water. You'll figure out who's doing what, where we are. Got 700 pages of this. See what comes out at the end.
Yeah.
And there's occasionally free-form prose, but it's usually atmospheric. It's describing the feeling of being on the LIRR, going out to Montauk or something like that, and not in a particularly linear way. And what he achieved, which was, I think, remarkable, is he said, you know how crazy Jimmy Joyce thought the way people thought and incoherent it was? Talk to a New Yorker. And after you read it and you sit on the subway and listen to a conversation, and he gets them perfectly. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, it was like, yeah, that thing. Yeah. I mean, I spoke to her about that. Did you speak to her about that? Yeah, I did. You know what she said? What'd she say? What were we talking about? I don't remember. I mean, a page. It's like,
it's very demanding on the reader. Yeah.
Hmm?
It's very demanding on the reader.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a wonderful writer, but I mean, you're making a commitment when you sit down with these massive tomes.
But if you look at some of the stories, the guy's prophetic. He apparently took like a decade to research this. So he wrote one book about called probably his most popular book, J.R.
Yeah.
About finance capitalism. This little 10-year-old kid that's been diagnosed as developmentally disabled goes to this class to the Wall Street Exchange, and they give him a symbolic quarter share, and he figures out how to leverage that into this huge empire through something that will in 3 years be called junk bonds. I mean, he just saw it. So later on, he writes a novel called A Frolic of His Own. You're going to like this, Mike. It's about an historian, an American historian from Long Island.
Oh, God.
Oh, God. And he works in, guess what period? The Civil War period.
Oh, good Lord. Okay.
All right. So here's this guy. And the beauty is his ancestors lived and fought in the Civil War.
Mm.
His dad and grandfather, both his great grandfather served with Holmes on the courts, and his father's an appellate judge and all this important stuff. So he's written a play based on his family story, and the family story is a wealthy a cadet branch of a wealthy industrial family in Pittsburgh, who gets cut out of the family fortune and therefore goes south to South Carolina and marries into immense plantation wealth. Just before the war breaks out, Gattis come up with it. The other branch, of which he's the cadet, dies out. So he now has to inherit that huge fortune in Pittsburgh. But if he goes north to inherit it, he loses this huge fortune in the South. So what he does is he hires, because you could in the Civil War, replacements to fight in both armies. I mean,
that's such a messed up idea.
And of course they meet, the two proxies, and kill each other at Shiloh, which where else would it happen but Shiloh?
Yeah.
So he writes this play, and it's called the Red and the Red, White and Blue. It's this horrible family tragedy. It gets better than this. So he wants to get published. There's a lot of other subplots here too with the law, but it's all about the law. This book, A Frolic of His Own, was 18th century for a frivolous lawsuit that a lawyer took on his own. And he sends it to a big Hollywood producer who, if you read the novel, you would have no idea who it was, because he's described as this immense blockbuster mediocre thief. And I don't know it. This sounds exactly like, but it couldn't be Steven Spielberg. It's it's Steven. So he sends it to Steven Spielberg. And of course, Spielberg sends it back and says, this is ridiculous. This is insane. I'm not going to show this. This is nuts, right? So he's heartbroken and he's crestfallen, and he's going to try and do it as a play. And then he sees the movie's just come out by Steven Spielberg. And it's his story. So this is his next frolic of his own. He's going to sue Steven Spielberg, or the Steven Spielberg equivalent of the story,
right,
for stealing his story.
Right.
Goes to a lawyer. Lawyer says, how are you going to prove he stole it? Well, I sent him the manuscript. Said, but he sent it back. He may not have even opened it. How do you know? He could have come up with this independently, right? So he says, tell you why. Because this isn't a piece of fiction. This happened to my family. And I have the documents and I can prove it. And the lawyer says, now get out of my office. You just lost the case. You can't copyright the truth. You can't copyright the past. If you told me you made up, if you could prove to me that you made up, that this is all lies, we could have a case. But if it's the actual historical truth, you can't copyright that. So I'm reading this, cackling it. Within 6 months, I think, of the release of that book, Steven Spielberg put out a movie. Remember this? Movie called Amistad.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Remember he got sued?
Yeah.
Because the author of the book, Amistad,
Yeah.
proposed it to him and he rejected it. And he made the movie.
Yeah.
And she sued him for robbing him blind.
Yeah.
And you know, he won the case. Do you know why? Because she said it was true. And the court said you can't copyright the truth. If your book was based on lies, you'd have a case.
Right.
So well, my point is, Gattis actually did a ton of research on that case. He'd probably seen some, not on that case, it hadn't happened yet, but on that eventuality that someone was going to do that. And he also knew Spielberg's. I mean, who else? If you were going to make a blockbuster, who else would you have picked in like 86 or 87?
Yeah.
I mean, there was no one bigger. Here's a guy can make a story about his childhood and people might actually show up and see it.
Right. Right.
But that was, I mean, things like that just amaze me that he has that ability to see just where the culture is headed and what's going on. So anyway, long story there. William Gattis, right. And you will laugh hysterically.
Yeah, it's really
the same
funny.
way in Disillusion.
I mean, we got a few minutes left.
Yeah, go.
Something I wanted to point out. You and I have some overlap in our musical tastes. And I really think that Leonard Cohen, the late, great Leonard Cohen, is a desperately underestimated musical artist, poet.
Yeah.
And you've always liked Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yes, quite a bit.
Right. And
I see them as the same, by the way.
Yeah, well, so do I. I mean, there's not that much difference between Jews and Catholics once they get like that with that unusual mindset. All right. And if there's one song that scares the ass off me, it's called "The Future" by Leonard Cohen. And this is what I'm hoping we can avoid. As he said once, oh, and by the way, you're not going to like what comes after America.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
And you've got the sparrows sharpening their beaks.
Yeah. And the cherry. Well, I mean, but you see, now this is the interesting thing, and it may be our generation, because we're both just on the cusp between the boomers that were older than us and the Xers that are, so
I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah, well, okay. But see it on both sides. And one of the things I think that was distinctive about Leonard Cohen